So join me for today's video if you want to learn how to use wire mesh, often referred to as chicken wire, in your floral design. So welcome back to today's video. Now I'm going to show you how you can use ordinary wire mesh to create your floral design. Now we often refer to this as chicken wire, but chicken wire has a much smaller sized gauge hole, which isn't really suitable for floral design because the holes aren't big enough to hold your flower stems. Now you really have to consider the size of your flower stems in relation to the size of the wire mesh. And by that I mean, if you've got small thin flowers like I have today, then you need to squash together your chicken wire to make those holes a little smaller. Whereas if you've got big thick stems and lots of woody garden material, then you need to have the wire gauge more open to accommodate those stems. So I've already got a small piece scrunched up inside of my container. And what you really need to do with wire mesh is to have at least 3 different levels so that when you place your stems in, they're not going to move around within your container itself. And by that I mean this is flat. If you place a stem here, it's just going to flop and move around. If you get that layered structure, so we'll just very quickly place it over so that we get a variety of different levels. So I'm just holding that in place for a moment. If we then place our flowers in, it's being supported by 3 different levels. If we want to create height in the arrangement and we want to go quite tall, then your mesh needs to be above the container, and that's what I'm going to work on in just a second. If you want to go sideways and not have so much height in your arrangement, then you can keep your wire mesh below the container. So that section that's already in my container is going to work quite well at holding my flowers at the base. And I'm just going to roll this over very quickly, shape it to get another section there over the top. Now this wire mesh I've got here is from a store here in the UK called Wilkinson's, and I tend to buy this in bulk form this time of the year so that it gets me through the different seasons. It's obviously from in the gardening section, and it's readily available this time of the year. Now because I want to go quite tall with this arrangement, I want to make sure that there's enough wire mesh to hold my tallest pieces of flower. So we're going to just play around with that for a minute, get that into position, and then I'm going to use some floral tape over the top to hold it into position. Once we start adding the weight of the flowers, then it will pull the wire mesh around. So making sure that's really secure in the container is quite important. And hopefully by the time I've finished adding all of my different flowers and greenery, I will have covered that ugly bit of tape. Sometimes when I'm talking on these videos, I forget to do the important points. Okay, so we're going to do a front facing arrangement and a design that would sit quite comfortably on a sideboard. You could recreate this for your place of worship. It would sit fabulously on a low coffee table that was up against a wall, but the majority of the flowers is going to be facing in one direction, which is why I referred to it as a front facing arrangement. Let's grab a bit of water, fill our container up, and this is a container that I haven't used for a little while. I do believe this is a container that I won in a raffle many years ago. In fact, I think my mother won it in a raffle. And I'm hoping it's waterproof, because if it's not, I'm going to look very silly in about 5 minutes time. Today, because I have a much bigger piece of wire mesh there in the middle, I'm going to cover that first. And I'm going to start with 2 fairly large hydrangeas. Now I do have a bit of an eclectic choice of flowers in this arrangement today. Hydrangeas this time of the year are imported into us from Colombia, and then they are going to work really well alongside some locally grown flowers. So I have flowers from very close to where I work to very far away. And one thing that sort of slightly frustrates me with many arrangers insisting on using insisting on using wire mesh because it's much better for the environment, which is really quite understandable. It frustrates me sometimes that maybe they haven't considered that their flowers have been flown from all around the world, and that has a huge detrimental effect on the environment as well. So I often think if you're using wire mesh and a more natural and sustainable mechanic, then maybe you should consider only using locally grown flowers from your own garden, and ones that haven't been flown in from miles away. So that's my little bugbear for today. Now I've started to create a little bit of coverage there on my foam. I'm going to introduce just a small amount of greenery, and initially this is greenery, or not quite greenery because it's grayery, from my own garden. And this you might recognise as Senecchio, and you've probably seen me use this before. This is a plant that survives our very harsh sort of winters here in the UK, and I tend to plant them in the spring as little bedding plants, and they do so well in my garden. Not everything lasts well, but these do. And then if I need a little bit of grey colouring for a bridal bouquet or for a design that week, then I can always go out and cut a little bit of this to use to bring in that lovely grey colour. I'm going to leave a few pieces a bit longer so that I can create a bit of height. And what I'm planning on doing is creating a design that's slightly taller, or maybe a lot taller on one side and a bit shorter on the opposite. So it's asymmetrical, but it's maybe not as curved as the crescent shapes that you quite often see me do. I am a great lover of the curved design when using wire mesh. And then my other piece can work quite nicely through my hydrangea head right down so that I get it into water. That's really important in this particular arrangement, that you get it right down through the mesh into the water. And I'm starting to create a little bit of asymmetrical balance with that particular design. I've got one or two shorter pieces which I'm going to sneak down quite low to try and start covering as much of that wire mesh as I can. And what I find this time of the year is my homegrown Senecchio lasts much better than the commercially available one. And more so to cover my base, I'm just going to pop in a little bit of the commercially available pistache greenery, just so that I get a bit of a foundation and a even sort of distribution there over my wire mesh. Don't forget that it's really important to bring flower and foliage weight to the back so that your design doesn't tip over. But I ideally want to keep this center section quite low, with the emphasis on the flowers almost growing up out of the sides of my arrangement. Right, so let's have a look at what else I've got to cover the base. You know, I've got quite a heavy concentration there of the white hydrangea. So what I'm going to do now is introduce a double pink tulip. This has got a really lovely quirky shape to it. And if I put it this side, the head is facing forward and I can really appreciate the double head. This one is quite tall and straight. I'm going to remove the lower greenery, give that a nice clean cut. And I'm going to place this in on the same side. So at the moment, there's a little bit of pink colouring starting to form on one side. And if you just noticed a bit of a startled expression on my face, it's because a squirrel just ran straight past my window and up the fence that's alongside of me. And it frightened the life out of me. But there we are. He's still sitting there. He's obviously gone and picked some nuts from somewhere. Okay, extending the height up now, we've got some more locally grown ranunculus, and I've got a few different varieties. Aren't they amazing? It does look a bit like an anemone, but I can assure you it is a ranunculus, and that's going to work really nicely on the opposite side. Get those stems down nice and low so we know we're taking up all of that water, and a couple of little ranunculus there on the opposite side. Now I'm a great lover of using the locally grown flowers in a more sustainable mechanic like this. I don't think that the soft stemmed flowers of ranunculus and anemones are always great lovers of the floral foam. They much prefer to be in clean water. It doesn't clog up the stems, and it really does help all the flowers to open up properly. So we've got this slightly darker, more cerise colour ranunculus there popped in at the front. And quite often I get asked, how do I decide what container suits what particular shape of arrangement? And I think that you've really got to look at the container. If it's square, then you're likely to make a square or a more rectangular shape arrangement in it. If your container is rounder, then you're likely to make something that's a bit more round in its appearance. And because I've only used 2 of the hydrangeas, and because I've only used 2 of the hydrangeas at the base, I've almost given it a squared look before I start. If I'd have used 3, it would have made that arrangement more circular in its appearance. So I've really thought from the very beginning to the end how I'm going to shape my arrangement and get the desired effect that I want to have. So nice bit of height there on one side, really seasonal arrangement. I don't mind if there's some softer material here at the side, because that's just the natural characteristic of the flower. Look at that. So amazing. And I'm so pleased that we have a local flower farm. In fact, I have 2. So I have the ability to have all these gorgeous flowers. Right, let's bring in some of the more darker cerise colour on the opposite side. Again, have a look at the way the flower is naturally curved and naturally bending, and use it for its best advantage. This one is just going to casually flop over the side of my container. This one I'm going to use closer down. Again, I'm not worried about that unusual shape. I'm not trying to make a formal arrangement where all my flowers are perfect and the shapes and the sizes are all identical. These little quirky little buds are going to add a nice little touch. And as I'm adding more colours and more flower shapes to the base, I'm starting to hide and to mask that very visually white placement I created with the hydrangeas. The more flowers that I'm adding in, the less visible those white hydrangeas are going to be. Okay, now I want to draw some of the white colouring up towards the top. And you might have seen me use these before. This is the butterfly ranunculus. At this time, these have come from the wholesaler, so the same place as my white hydrangeas. But it's going to help give me a bit of a colour link up high and draw your eye away from the white hydrangea up towards the top. I've only got a few pieces left of this because I've used them in quite a few arrangements so far. And they look so fragile. They're very delicate in their appearance. They are quite a strong, robust flower that does last very well. And another white is going to be the traditional Pon Pon Ranunculus that we're a little bit more familiar with. I'm going to cut it again so that I get 2 pieces instead of 1. This will give me some height and introduce some of the white a little bit higher up. This one, a much larger head, can come on my left hand side, and now you can really see that I'm starting to camouflage and hide that very heavy base and make the design much softer and much more whimsical in its appearance. Now, if you are trying to create this design at home and you don't have these very natural, delicate sort of flower types, when you're at your local supermarket, you just really want to look at the different bunches that are on offer. Daffodils and tulips and irises this time of the year would look really well. Gerbras and spray carnations would give you a fabulous look. And avoid really looking for any heavy flowers, so nothing like a lily or a chrysanthemum head, because that's not quite going to give you that delicate, soft and floaty look that we're trying to create. I don't want to overfill this centre section here because I still want to make it asymmetrical with more height on one side. If you've got garden flowers that have been damaged a little bit by the wind, then they would be ideal in this arrangement because they won't be perfectly matching. You'll have a bit of personality and characteristics showing in them. And this is coming along really nicely at the moment. So I'm limited with the length of some of the flowers because they're not going to create any added height to my arrangement. And if you've got blossom in your garden at the moment or branches without any flowers on it, then they would work really well as well. I've got a little section at the bottom here where I can still see my wire mesh. So I'm just going to tuck one of the ranunculus in the base there. And now I'm going to introduce the Scabious. Now this one is called Candy Scoop. It's a gorgeous shade. Just got a rose tucked in with that one. And hopefully these are going to give me a little bit more height. Now these have been sitting in water while I've been talking to you, so if I haven't cut some of the stems, don't worry too much because they've come straight out of water and they're going straight back into water. I know some of you sometimes comment that I haven't cut the stems, but I am fully aware that the stems are having a nice clean cut before I push them back in through the wire mesh. Now you might notice at this stage I'm starting to have a bit of resistance placing my flowers in through that wire mesh, and that's generally a good sign that the arrangement doesn't really need any more flowers. There's no point keeping on adding your flower stems in and forcing them through into the wire mesh because then there won't be an adequate water supply to keep those flowers alive. So when you start getting a bit of resistance, it could be floral foam or it could be the wire mesh like this, then it's a sign that you don't need to keep on adding any more greenery. Now if I take a little step back and have a look at that, I really don't think I need an awful lot more in. I'm just going to use up this final one towards the back. It's going to bring a bit of colour through to the back, help aid that depth, bring some weight to the back to create some balance. And overall, I think I'm really happy with how that design has turned out. There's still a small gap in the middle, so the flowers are swooshing down from one side to the other to create quite a dramatic, very seasonal flower design. I really do love this type of arrangement. It's very natural and very therapeutic to do. Don't forget to check out the website to see if there's any courses running online that you might like to participate in. Pop over to my Etsy store if you want to buy an instructional guide that runs alongside this tutorial. Give us a like and a comment, share with your friends and family to help this channel grow. And if you've got any questions, please pop them in the comment box below. And I look forward to seeing you again very soon for the next tutorial. So bye for now.